Earth appeared on the display as a problem already solved. From the Imperial command dais, the Sol system looked small, bright, and disorganized. Too many heat signatures, too much electromagnetic noise, too little discipline. Orbital traffic cluttered the inner lanes. Civilian habitats drifted without symmetry. Defensive platforms, where they existed at all, were scattered and inelegant. To the admirals observing, it looked less like a fortress and more like a mistake that had survived. Too long. The briefing summary was blunt. Species, human. Industrial capacity, high but inefficient. Military doctrine, kinetic-heavy, outdated, psychologically aggressive. Political state, fragmented. Risk assessment placed Earth well below the threshold for serious resistance. The Empire had processed worlds with cleaner orbits and quieter signals. Unstable, one commander said, watching the data scroll. Predictable, another added. Earth's history was displayed next, compressed into timelines and casualty graphs. Endless internal conflict, resource wars, atmospheric damage followed by partial recovery. A civilization that learned through pain rather than foresight. The analysts marked it as a weakness. Civilizations like this burned brightly, then collapsed when confronted by something orderly. Processing class. Green. The designation propagated through the fleet without objection. Processing did not imply annihilation. It implied optimization. Infrastructure seized, populations pacified, labor reassigned. The Empire took pride in efficiency, and Earth promised scale. 20 billion lives, give or take. Manageable, a junior intelligence officer flagged the warnings attached to the file. Old advisories from minor powers, outdated encounter reports, fragments of testimony that described humans as deceptive, persistent, and unreasonably violent under pressure. The Admiral dismissed them with a flick of a digit. Relic fear, they decided. Every expanding empire collected myths from those it absorbed. Fleet strength was reviewed. 10,000 vessels across multiple task groups. Command ships positioned to project authority, not caution. Estimated time to orbital dominance, 6 hours. Estimated. Time to surface compliance, 72. Loss projections remained comfortably low. Why hasn't anyone claimed it already? One strategist asked. Because it isn't worth holding, came the reply. Too loud, too volatile. Laughter rippled softly across the dais. Earth was a backwater that thought itself important because no one had corrected it yet. The Empire would be kind enough to do so. The first wave advanced on standard vectors, deliberately visible. This was doctrine. Visibility discouraged resistance. The humans would see the fleet, measure the disparity, and submit. Most species did. Those that didn't learned quickly. As the Armada crossed the heliopause, long-range sensors registered. Nothing resembling organized defense, no unified fleets, no power signatures matching Imperial-grade technology. The emptiness was taken as confirmation, no meaningful resistance expected. The phrase appeared on multiple displays, tagged for post-operation analysis. A final note scrolled at the bottom of the briefing, historical anomaly, unresolved. Earth had been attacked before. Twice. Both incursions had ended abruptly, with incomplete data and unexplained losses on the attacker's side. The records were old, fragmented, and inconclusive. Accidents, the Admiral said. Or incompetence. The Q. Fleet continued inward, confident, immaculate, and utterly certain of its conclusions. From the Empire's perspective, Earth was not a threat. It was an opportunity, loud, messy, and overdue for correction. They advanced without urgency, without fear, and without the slightest suspicion that the world they had labeled a trap had been waiting for someone exactly like them. The response arrived before the ultimatum finished broadcasting. Imperial channels collapsed into a single priority feed as an external signal asserted access without matching any recognized diplomatic protocol. No banners, no ceremonial preamble, just a steady human voice, unamplified and precise. You are entering restricted space, it said. Alter course immediately. The command dais went quiet. The Admiral recovered first. Posture unchanged. Authority markers flared as the reply was issued, patient and instructional. Imperial jurisdiction was asserted under Expansion Charter. Earth was designated a processing world. Transit would continue. The statement ended with a courtesy clause translated into 12 regulated bands. "This space is claimed," the human voice replied. "Transit is denied." Earth does not comply. Analysts flagged the phrase for anomaly. Denial without negotiation. Was unusual but not alarming. The Admiral requested clarification, adding context the way one explained inevitability. 10,000 Imperial vessels present. Approach already underway. No hostile intent registered. Your numbers are accurate, the human said. Your assumption is not. Legal framing followed. Precedent was cited. No recognized power had ever enforced exclusive sovereignty this close to Imperial lanes. Silence, the Admiral suggested, was not authority. We do not advertise our borders, the human replied. We enforce them. A visual link was requested and granted. The image resolved slowly, a functional operations deck, lighting tuned for work rather than display. A single human stood centered, hands behind their back, posture relaxed to the edge of disrespect. No insignia, no rank markers. Eyes steady. You are obstructing lawful transit, the Admiral said. You are trespassing, the human answered. Trespass. The Admiral's tone hardened. Consequences were outlined. Escalation pathways described. Timers appeared. 300 seconds. To alter course, 600 to clear the zone, offered as compromise. The human watched the counters tick for 3 seconds. Do not proceed, they said. Any further advance will be treated as hostile action. And if we continue? Then you will cross a line, the human replied. We will respond. No threat followed, no weapons powered up. The human presence on sensors remained faint, stubbornly unimpressive. The Admiral seized on that emptiness, gesturing to the display. With what? They asked. With what is already here, the human said. Already here. The channel stayed open. The human added, almost as an aside, surrender protocols will be honored. The phrase landed awkwardly, premature and misplaced. A few officers exchanged looks. The Admiral laughed once, sharp, dismissive, and terminated the link. Continue advance, they ordered. Demonstration posture. Energy. Systems charged to instructional output, well below lethal thresholds. This would be a lesson, not a battle. The Empire would teach Earth the cost of defiance and the meaning of authority. Across the void, nothing moved. No fleets revealed themselves. No guns flared. The border remained empty, quiet, and unconvincing. The Armada resumed forward motion, confident that boundaries without visible force were only words. They crossed the line anyway, unaware that the refusal they had just ignored was the last one they would ever be offered. The first volley was calibrated to instruct, not destroy. Imperial gunnery doctrine set output to 18%, enough to overwhelm any undeveloped defense grid while preserving infrastructure for seizure. 6 forward cruisers aligned emitters and released coherent energy lances across 28,000 kilometers. A vacuum. The beams struck the lead human contact squarely, flooding space with glare and thermal distortion. The light faded. Nothing else changed. No shield bloom, no harmonic cascade. The energy did not disperse outward as expected. It bled inward, vanishing into layered structures that should not have tolerated the load. Thermal spikes registered, peaked, and flattened in under 0.7 seconds. Radiation backscatter fell below background noise. The contact remained exactly where it had been, velocity unchanged, no damage registered. Weapons officers recalibrated without speaking. Absorption metrics populated the tactical display. 81%, then 87%, then 92.4%, as secondary sensors refined the red. The number stabilized and refused to fall. Doctrine escalated. 12 cruisers fired at 35%, frequencies staggered, to induce resonance failure in crude materials. Space around the target became a wall of light. Armor blackened and sloughed away in controlled layers, venting charge into vacuum exactly as if designed for the purpose. Beneath them, identical layers held, aligned, and unbroken. Internal telemetry resolved through the glare. Human life signs. Steady. No decompression. No fire. Containment warnings began to chirp across Imperial consoles. At 50% output, emitter housings exceeded nominal thermal limits. M1 cruiser dropped power to vent plasma, logging self-inflicted damage, while the human contact registered none. This should have worked. The phrase appeared in a margin note, flagged for emotional deviation. The Admiral authorized a focused strike from the flagship's primary array, pushing output to 70% and breaching peacetime safety margins. The beam hit with force sufficient to fracture planetoid crust. The human silhouette glowed white, then dimmed. Heat vanished into sinks the Imperial models could not resolve. Absorption dipped briefly to 89%, then climbed back above 93% as adaptive layers shifted configuration. A narrowband transmission cut through the tactical noise. Unencrypted. Clean. A data packet followed. Impact curves. Dissipation timelines. Annotated with timestamps. A single line of text closed the file. Losses within tolerance. Silence spread across the command deck. Officers spoke over one another, proposing exotic spectra, phase inversions, untested harmonics pulled from research annexes. The Admiral authorized one final demonstration volley at 80% to end the anomaly and reassert control. As emitters charged, sensors flagged motion, not retreat, approach. The human contact's acceleration curve rose smoothly, 3G, then 6, without spike or strain. Distance counters began to tick down. 28,000 kilometers to 24,600. Target is advancing, a technician reported, disbelief slipping into their voice. The Admiral dismissed it as desperation. No unsophisticated vessel could sustain acceleration without killing its crew. The physiology tables were clear. The distance closed another 2,000 kilometers. Human power output remained flat. Armor still steamed faintly where energy had struck and failed. At 80%, Imperial emitters began to scream. Containment fields warped. Gunnery crews struggled to hold alignment as their own systems degraded under the load. The human ship continued inward, indifferent to the fire washing over it. Energy is not stopping them. The realization arrived too slowly. The weapons were performing exactly as designed. They were efficient, elegant, and devastating, against the assumptions they had been built to satisfy. As the range collapsed toward distances the Empire preferred to avoid, the Admiral ordered fire to continue, clinging to probability and precedent. Crossy. The void. The human ship absorbed the last of the light without haste, closed the gap, and did not return a single shot, leaving the Empire to confront the fact that its greatest weapons had failed to mean anything at all. They answered energy with motion. As Imperial emitters strained toward sustained output, the human contact's drive profile shifted, not as a surge, but as a deliberate climb. Acceleration rose past 5G, then 8, then settled at a sustained 12. Sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the number. Imperial physiology tables marked it lethal. The human ship held it without deviation. 12G, sustained. The distance fell cleanly, 24,600 kilometers to 19,000 in seconds. No evasive jinx, no waste. The ship shortened the equation, then the emptiness betrayed the charts. Contacts resolved where none had been predicted. First 6, then 20, then 67, distributed across millions of kilometers along. Dead vectors. They had been there already, emissions folded low, motion deferred until timing mattered. Imperial formations tightened into elegant shells, orders overlapped, corrections collided. Human ships accelerated on offset clocks, fractions. It was second apart, threading through firing envelopes without sharing a single solution. They did not coast. They sustained. They are not running. At 15,400 kilometers, energy coherence degraded and reaction windows collapsed. Gunnery asked for time. Physics denied it. A heavy cruiser attempted to create space and found a human corvette already occupying the corridor, sliding past at relative velocity high enough to shear sensor vanes and blind afterrays. No shots were fired. Escorts overcorrected to avoid collision, tearing a hole the humans flowed through without slowing. This was not a charge. It was geometry applied under pressure. Acceleration profiles rose and fell with intent. One human ship, cut thrust at 5,100 kilometers, pivoted broadside, then resumed at 12 grags along a new vector, forcing two Imperial vessels to choose between collision or separation. They separated. Mutual coverage died with the distance. At 9,900 kilometers, a command cruiser attempted a coordinated pullback. The vectors it needed were already occupied. Human ships held those lines calmly, denying escape without pursuit. No pursuit followed. The denial was enough. Closing is a weapon. Imperial doctrine relied on probability bands that assumed opponents would blink. The humans did not. At 6,200 kilometers, the lead ship bled velocity in a controlled burn that would have liquefied unconditioned crews. Inertial systems held. It rotated into alignment. Dark apertures along its spine, irised open. Around it, other human ships settled into brackets that isolated command hulls without firing a shot. Traffic density spiked. Choices vanished. A cruiser tried to slip through a narrowing gap and clipped a human destroyer's wake. The destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.3 G and passed within meters, close enough for Imperial sensors to read armor scars and heat bloom patterns. No paint, no warning, just proximity doing the work. At 3,600 kilometers, Imperial Command attempted a synchronized withdrawal. Orders propagated too late. Human timing collapsed the shells from the inside, turning elegance into congestion. Fire control. Solutions lagged as targets refused to behave. The models failed first. When the distances stabilized inside optimal kinetic range, the humans stopped accelerating. They did not need more speed. Authority had already changed hands, measured in meters per second squared, and the empty space the Empire could no longer claim. Human ships held position, geometry locked, weapons still cold. The trap closed, not with impact, but with inevitability, and the quiet certainty that the next calculation would not favor restraint. The range collapsed, and the wolves bared their teeth. Human fire control waited until probability bands shrank below irrelevance. 3 Imperial command vessels sat inside 3,600 kilometers, their formations already distorted by forced separation and conflicting vectors. Solutions finalized in silence. Only then did the railguns speak. There was no warning flare, only mass at velocity. 9 tungsten penetrators left the lead human ship's spinal rails, spaced 0.14 seconds apart, to defeat predictive interception. Imperial sensors registered impact before firing alerts finished propagating. The first slug punched through a command cruiser's prow, ignored ceremonial superstructure, and exited through the coordination core. The second followed the same, channel widening it. Pressure collapsed, power failed in sequence. The hull split along stress lines never modeled for kinetic intrusion. 1. Missiles followed, not in salvos but in arithmetic. 5 from one vector, 7 from another, each carried distinct guidance logic. Decoys burned hot and obvious, dragging point defenses outward. The real warheads coasted cold, waking only in the final seconds. Interceptors chased what they could see. The rest arrived untouched. A second command vessel attempted emergency thrust, clawing for distance back towards 6,000 kilometers. The maneuver exposed its ventral plane for 0.8 seconds. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening. A fourth followed milliseconds later, delayed to exploit the sudden pressure differential. The gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the hull collapsed inward. Life signs dropped from 8,904 to 0 in under 4 seconds. 2. Imperial captains shouted for withdrawal corridors. None existed. Human ships occupied the vectors they needed, holding position with sustained acceleration that denied passage without pursuit. The third command vessel fired blindly, energy lances splashing across empty space as its fire control lagged behind human motion. A human cruiser answered with a missile carrying a limited-yield nuclear charge. The detonation occurred at calculated standoff, shaped and directional. It did not vaporize the target. It crushed sensor arrays, fractured internal compartments, and collapsed command spaces in a single controlled wave. The vessel went dark, drifting. Structure mostly intact, but systems dead. 3. Human fire paused for 1.6 seconds. Targeting logic re-evaluated. Lesser Imperial ships were ignored. Screens that no longer coordinated anything were allowed to live. Fire resumed only when a heavy cruiser attempted to reassert authority by broadcasting override codes across the fleet. One railgun round removed the antenna cluster. The cruiser powered down moments later, surrender codes spilling across every channel. We count before we fire. The phrase appeared briefly on an Imperial auxiliary display, flagged as anomalous doctrine. No one had time to question it. At 2,400 kilometers, a cluster of Imperial escorts attempted a desperate mass maneuver, aiming to ram a human destroyer and disrupt firing geometry. The destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.5 G, slid aside, and let the escorts collide with one another. Human sensors logged the event as environmental hazard neutralization. No shots were fired. Missiles continued to arrive in measured numbers, not saturation, selection. Each impact removed a vessel that mattered. Ammunition counters updated in clean columns. Railgun rounds fired 28, confirmed kills 11, command vessels destroyed 2, 1 disabled for capture. Nuclear charges expended. 1 point human losses remained at 0 destroyed hulls. 4 ships reported superficial armor ablation. Crews remained operational. At 34 minutes, Imperial command coherence fell below 35%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses. Some captains fought on until emitters overheated. Others powered down immediately, broadcasting surrender in overlapping frequencies. Human systems acknowledged each signal automatically, marking surrendered hulls green and excluding them from targeting solutions, even when missiles were already inbound, peeling them away mid-course without hesitation. The killing stopped, not with a final blow, but with a quiet certainty that nothing left required killing. Human ships held position, weapons warm but steady. The Imperial Armada drifted in broken clusters, stunned by how quickly superiority had been reduced to counting and how little emotion had been required to balance the ledger. The guns went silent by choice, not exhaustion. At 34 minutes and 12 seconds, every human weapon system stood down at once. Rail capacitors discharged into sinks, missile bays sealed. Fire control solutions cleared across the lattice as if erased by a single command. Imperial crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission unfolded outward from the human formation, riding military bands, civilian relays, and open spectrum. Repeaters until it spilled far beyond the contested system. The image was plain. A human officer stood centered in frame, posture unchanged from first contact. No insignia, no victory markers. "This engagement is paused," the officer said, voice level and precise. "Escalation has ended. Imperial commanders braced for annihilation terms. None came. We are broadcasting under universal jurisdiction," the officer continued. Data panes unfolded beside the image, definitions, statutes, thresholds, cleanly indexed and time-stamped. First, the practice of sentient slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel, facility, or authority engaged in ownership, transport, or processing of sentient beings is designated a criminal enterprise. Across the Imperial fleet, internal alerts flared as registries updated. Cargo holds, long normalized, appeared on tactical displays as liabilities. Automated processing queues froze mid-cycle. Second, the officer said, surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding actions will be conducted solely to secure weapons and render aid. We do not kill prisoners. The sentence propagated verbatim across channels. Human fire control enforced it without exception. Green markers multiplied as Imperial hulls powered down, some cautiously, others all at once. Targeting logic excluded them instantly, even when geometry favored easy destruction. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word carried weight without emphasis. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded. Jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts, not fleets. An Imperial legal envoy attempted to interrupt, citing sovereignty and charter precedent. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement, the officer replied. Charters that permit it are void. Numbers scrolled beneath the image, stark and unavoidable. Enslaved populations identified, 3.6 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 287. Command personnel pending detention, 162. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human ships began to move again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in controlled numbers, medics visible through viewports, weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones sealed ruptures on powerless hulls to prevent cascading failures. A human frigate altered course by 0.2 degrees to shield a surrendered cruiser from debris drift, surrendering optimal position without comment. The officer concluded without flourish. You mistook restraint for weakness, they said. This is restraint. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, the Imperial fleet confronted a reality no doctrine had prepared it for. The battle had stopped, not because humanity lacked force, but because it had decided killing was no longer required and possessed the power to make that decision absolute. The realization did not come from the battlefield. It came from those watching it. Coalition observers had monitored the incursion from beyond Imperial lanes, sensors wide and passive, habits learned from surviving beside larger powers. While Imperial commanders struggled to reinterpret failure, Coalition analysts replayed the engagement without doctrine or pride. They did not ask how Earth had won. They asked why the border had been empty. The answer emerged from the data like a confession. Human ships had not arrived. They had resolved. Emissions unfolded from background noise where they had been masked for decades. Low-power hulls parked along dead vectors, acceleration profiles suppressed until motion became unavoidable. 67 combat vessels had been present before. The first Imperial crossing, distributed across 4.4 million kilometers in a lattice that only existed once it was activated. The border was not undefended. It was pre-solved. Earth was ready first. Coalition tacticians overlaid human vectors against historical traffic models and felt the pattern lock into place. The positions aligned with choke geometries charted centuries. Earlier, back when Imperial expansion had been predictable rather than absolute. Human doctrine had anticipated approach routes, decision latency, even the psychological sequencing of escalation. The formations the Empire lost were not reactions. They were answers, waiting for questions. Logistics data deepened the cut. Human depots appeared just beyond standard sensor resolution. Fuel caches embedded in inert bodies, ammunition stores disguised as survey platforms, maintenance nodes built into asteroid shadows. Carbon dating on exposed structures returned, values that forced recalibration, 214 years, some older. They built the trap before there was prey, a Coalition analyst said quietly. Physiology reports matched the hardware. Sustained 12G acceleration had not been an emergency measure. It was baseline. Human training regimes assumed prolonged stress that Coalition militaries classified as fatal. Centrifuge conditioning, skeletal reinforcement, cardiovascular adaptation cycles measured in decades, not deployments. Human crews had not endured the battle. They had executed a routine. Historical overlays rewrote old mysteries. Minor incidents the Empire had dismissed as piracy, command ships lost near quiet borders, task groups that vanished without debris fields, matched human kinetic signatures too closely to ignore. The silence around Earth had never been neglect. It had been policy. They don't defend borders, a Coalition diplomat concluded. They enforce crossing. Political models updated in real time. Systems that had relied on Imperial protection recalculated exposure. Worlds sharing human borders and long puzzled by the absence of patrols understood the cost of testing them. Quiet was cheaper than war, and humanity had invested centuries to keep it that way. The law broadcast took on new weight in that light. It was not improvisation. It was policy refined and waiting, trials pre-written, surrender protocols standardized, humanitarian corridors charted along routes planned long before anyone thought Earth mattered. As the coalition disseminated the analysis through encrypted channels, alignments shifted without announcement. Neutral systems filed for arbitration. Trade routes bent away from Imperial space and toward the quiet line humanity held. Inside the shattered Imperial fleet, survivors searched for the moment everything had gone wrong. Outside it, the answer settled with uncomfortable clarity. Earth had not risen to meet the Empire. It had been waiting for it. Neutralization resumed with boundaries, not anger. Human command reclassified the remaining Imperial vessels into 3 states: hostile, surrendered, undecided, and acted only on the first. The distinction was enforced by systems and people together. Green-marked hulls vanished from firing solutions even when they drifted through optimal arcs. Red-marked ones received no further warnings. Missile bays opened across the human lattice. There was no announcement. Waves launched in disciplined silence, hundreds of signatures blooming and fading as guidance systems shifted between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single point. They flowed through volume, dividing and recombining, filling corridors of space. Imperial doctrine had never treated as lethal simultaneously. Point defenses reacted by reflex and failed by design. Interceptors chased decoys that burned bright and loud, pulling tracking solutions outward. The real warheads coasted dark, waking only in the final seconds. At 9,400 kilometers, the first hostile cruiser ruptured under combined kinetic and shaped charge impact, engines still firing as its hull split along power conduits. Surrender now. The broadcast repeated in 12 bands, unthreatening and precise. Some Imperial captains complied immediately, powering down and transmitting codes that flipped their markers green within milliseconds. Human targeting peeled missiles away mid-course without hesitation, retasking them against still red hulls, deeper in the formation. Others hesitated, waiting for orders that never came. Their hesitation was counted as intent. The cascade accelerated. At 11 minutes into the phase, hostile markers dropped by a third. At 18, by half. Imperial command coherence, already fractured, collapsed below 20%. Decisions devolved to individual bridges, each cut off from context and reassurance. Boarding. Operations followed behind the missile waves as a second geometry, slower and deliberate. Human cutters approached disabled ships at controlled relative velocities, grapples locking with mechanical certainty. Breach teams moved in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. They sealed bulkheads instead of blasting them. They vented compartments instead of charging through them. Resistance, when it appeared, was isolated, recorded, and denied options until it stopped. Do not fire on green. The directive pulsed continuously across human channels. It was obeyed even when green-marked hulls drifted into perfect firing solutions against red targets. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve doctrine. The choice extended the operation by minutes. No one objected. At 24 minutes, an Imperial carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a desperate effort to overwhelm point defenses. Human response was surgical. Point defense grids engaged not to annihilate, but to shape. Kill cones herded the fighters into narrow volumes where electromagnetic pulses fired in timed bursts, frying guidance systems and power buses. Hundreds of craft went dead in space, pilots alive, instruments blind. Automated recovery beacons, activated without instruction. Fighters neutralized. Coalition monitors flagged the phenomenon as a statistical inflection rather than a tactic. Once a critical mass of Imperial ships powered down and survived intact, the remainder followed faster than any command could compel. At 37 minutes, surrendered hulls outnumbered hostile ones 4-1. At 52 minutes, 6-1. The last organized. Resistance formed around a crippled logistics tender, heavy cruisers attempting to shield it with overlapping fire. Human analysis flagged the maneuver as emotionally driven. Missile fire softened the ring without saturation. Railgun shots punched precise holes through power cores and thruster assemblies. The tender was disabled without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants, damage control drones sealing breaches to prevent atmosphere loss. Throughout the phase, the lead human ship held central position, anchoring the geometry. Its railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing vessels that threatened to destabilize the surrender perimeter. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns, missiles expended 361, railgun rounds 19 in this phase, nuclear charges 0. Human losses remained unchanged. At 71 minutes, the final red marker flickered, then turned green. The battle space did not erupt in celebration. It simply went quiet. Hundreds of Imperial hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them like custodians, dispatching repair drones, establishing traffic lanes, preventing collisions that would have killed crews who had already surrendered. Prisoner counts stabilized at 3.9 million. Injured, treated reached 412,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile marker disappeared. An Imperial officer aboard a powerless cruiser watched a human frigate adjust thrust by 0.4 degrees to avoid debris that might strike their hull, and felt something unfamiliar settle in their chest. Not relief, not fear, recognition. The border was quiet again, not because nothing had happened, but because everything that needed to be enforced had been. Mercy followed enforcement without delay. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored urgency. Atmospheres stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured Imperial crew were triaged without comment, species tags flashing briefly before collapsing into a single priority schema. Analgesics flowed, hemorrhages sealed, fractures braced. The work was fast, practiced, and conspicuously indifferent. To uniform or insignia, no reprisals. The directive carried the same authority as a firing order. Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal framework already live and waiting. Temporary detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food met dietary requirements calculated to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in neutral tones. Prisoner counts stabilized at 3.9 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like commitments, rather than estimates. Across the border region, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys arrived along pre-cleared vectors, bearing insignia from systems that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched manifests populate and recognized the shift immediately. Nearby polities were not waiting for invitations, they were submitting filings, suspension of Imperial tribute, opening of ports to human oversight. Requests for arbitration under statutes broadcast during the engagement. Political gravity shifted without ceremony. The Empire's authority bled away through compliance forms faster than it ever had through force. Systems that had lived under warnings and probabilities chose certainty instead. We accept these terms. The phrase appeared in multiple declarations, identical down to punctuation, traced to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged it as mimetic adoption. Human Command did not comment. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action completed. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity. Enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked sensor logs to testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier were separated and transferred under guard that neither tightened when they struggled nor softened when they pleaded. The guards had heard both before. An Imperial sector prefect attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate realignment. The reply came from a human legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. Inside the detention habitats, rumors spread faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed that surrender had worked exactly as promised. They noticed that no one had been spaced, no compartments flooded, no reprisals taken for insults shouted in panic. The lesson settled unevenly, but permanently. At 84 hours, the first liberated populations were transferred off seized vessels. Families emerged into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights, calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stepped aside as civilian agencies took over, their role complete. The lead human ship remained on station, scarred, armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note. Force applied, boundary enforced, mercy sustained. In nearby systems, leaders weighed the cost of ignoring warnings against the evidence. Flowing through every relay, the calculation was no longer abstract. Human space did not expand that day, but the meaning of crossing into it changed everywhere. The quiet returned with intention. Debris fields were catalogued and nudged into decay orbits. Traffic corridors reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated through secure channels with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the border looked empty again, as if nothing had happened and nothing needed guarding. Human sensors did not stand down. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the outer markers. Baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 112 hours post-engagement, one array returned a contact that refused clean classification. The signature was faint, persistent, and wrong. Not a fleet, not a probe. A distortion suggesting mass in motion without conventional drives. Analysts rerun the data. The anomaly held its origin lay beyond the outer rim, at a distance exceeding 41,000 AU, approaching on a vector that ignored established corridors and jumped geometry. Mass estimates fluctuated wildly, as if the object resisted measurement. Emission profiles matched fragments buried in pre-Imperial archives, records of systems stripped clean, of civilizations erased so thoroughly their names survived only. These cautions, an exterminator signature. Human command convened without alarms or ceremony. Relief operations continued uninterrupted. Boarding schedules held. The information was compartmentalized and routed to planning cells that predated the Empire's expansion into this sector. Contingency headers unlocked, timelines populated. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition. Observer, cleared under emergency protocols, asked a single question over a secure channel. Is this a response to Earth's defense? The human reply came after a brief pause. It is adjacent, they said. Not causal, meaning it would have come regardless, meaning the Empire had never been the terminal risk. The lead human ship adjusted station by 0.3 degrees, aligning its long-range sensors with the incoming anomaly. Around it, other ships mirrored the motion without instruction, geometry settling, into a configuration older than any treaty the Empire had enforced. Ammunition tallies updated, training rotations shifted. Messages went out to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Beyond the rim, something ancient continued inward, indifferent to borders, law, or surrender. Humanity watched it approach with the same calm it had shown an empire, and began doing the math again.